Hi, my name is Ryan Breen, and my presentation is covering technology's impact on social media. To give you a little background on this subject, social media is known as society's main means of mass communication. The technologies that allow us to communicate and receive information are constantly being improved upon. For instance, innovations such as the radio, the television, the internet, and the computer are all great examples of technology that are changing social media. There has been plenty of research on how the emergence of these technologies have impacted social media, which I will cover throughout this presentation. The first technology I would like to cover is the radio. The radio was invented in the late 1800s, but was not heavily involved with news media until the 1930s. In the mid-1930s, radios were in almost every household across the United States of America. Everybody had a radio. One of the scholarly journals that I researched was the Journal of Business Communication. In this journal, a woman named Wendy Pope wrote, by the late 1930s, radio was woven into the fabric of American life. Public events, from political rallies to sporting events, were now enjoyed by millions in private. And, increasingly, Americans now got their news from the radio, especially news of the expanding war in Europe. In that quote, Wendy is really explaining how important and popular the radio was to the American public in the 1930s. Even the 32nd President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt, depended heavily on the radio as his main way of speaking to the American people, especially during the tragic years of the Great Depression. He would get on the radio and talk to the American public about the financial burdens they were facing and try to cope with them. Wendy Papa also wrote, prior to the popularity of the radio, most people received news from publications. Thus, current events were at least one day old before people were informed. The radio changed the pace at which information was exchanged. The news could be mass delivered almost simultaneously with this occurrence. This increased reaction time for the public. Wendy is explaining how the radio actually sped up the travel time of the news. Instead of the public reading newspapers that had day-old or two-day-old news in them, people were now able to get breaking news alerts that happened that day via the radio. A few years later came the television, and now I will talk about the television's impact. As I researched a scholarly article written by Finola Kerrigan titled Interaction of Regional News Media Production and Consumption Through the Social Space. In this article, Finola writes, in the 1950s, the role of the radio was gradually displaced by the advent of the television, which enjoyed greater popularity because of its visual aspect. People really enjoyed that they were able to see the news that was going on with their eyes instead of hearing the news like the radio or reading the news like the newspaper would give them. The television brought live coverage of wars, natural disasters, sports, and many more aspects right into the public living rooms that they could actually view themselves. Now on to what I personally think has impacted social media the most, and that is being the internet. In 2009, Andreas Klein wrote an article titled The Impact of New Media on Internet-Based Consumer Behavior. In this article, she wrote, research also shows that whether a major event is taking place or not, the internet is by far the primary news source for most Americans throughout the workday. The thing that shocked me most about that quote is that the internet has only been around for a few decades, and things like the radio, television, and newspaper has been surpassed by the internet as the main source of news coverage, and the newspaper and television and such have been around for many decades longer than the internet. So that just shows how quickly the internet gained its popularity and how much people really like using the internet, because just with one click of the mouse they could see whatever news they would like. Another interesting journal I came across is called The Internet Impact on Traditional Media Use for News. In this journal, a study is conducted that examines the relationship between the use of the internet and traditional forms of media for news, while controlling such demographic factors such as gender, family income, and education. The results of the study were that although the internet appears to be stronger than the news sources such as print and broadcasting, it is highly unlikely that the internet will drive them out of existence through a displacement process. So, although the internet is the most used and most popular news media outlet, the radio and television, newspaper are still here to stay, even though they're considered technologies of the past. The final study I will be talking about is Adam Brazel's Media Multitasking Behavior, Concurrent Television and Computer Usage. In Adam's study, he did a laboratory experiment where he took both younger and older individuals as they used a computer and television at the same exact time and measured what they were able to take from seeing both of those, both the computer and the television. What he found was that the younger individuals were more adept for using both mediums, while the older audience was more adept for focusing on the television and only the television. Brazel realizes that this would have been the more easy assumption, considering the older individuals were more familiar with the television because of their age, while the younger individuals were more familiar with both instruments. This shows how the older generations prefer the more traditional forms of media, such as the television in this case, but the younger generation is more adapted to multitasking and can focus both on the computer and internet, as well as the TV, as well as other forms of media. So people are adapting to the new technologies just fine. To conclude this presentation, I have learned through my research that there is a very, very close relationship between news media and technology. And social media has been greatly improved due to these technological advances. I strongly believe that news media is the best it's ever been, thanks to all these new technologies, and I hope that new technologies emerge so that it can only get better. Thank you.